These two guys have Minnesota sports flowing in their veins. Mackey and Judd on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
That's right. Welcome into Mackey and Judd fill out today. We expect him back tomorrow, so it's Judd, it's Declan, and also appearing, if you are catching this on YouTube, on our screen, our good friend Dane Moore of the Dane Moore NBA podcast, who covers the Timberwolves, does an outstanding job on his podcast of talking about the team basically on a daily basis. And Dane, just wanted to have you on the eve now of the regular season opener. And I want to start you with this one because it strikes me, and in my days on the beat, I think I know your response, but I do want to hear it.
I don't know.
How tired are you of the anticipation? And I guess more importantly and more positively, how excited are you just for the basketball to be tipped off, and now you actually get to see Gobert and Towns instead of like hypothesizing about what they might do?
Yeah, man, I'm ready. It's been so odd that we haven't got to see it, which is something we did not remotely expect when this trade went down on July 1st, right? We had this anticipation of what is this going to look like? What is this going to look like? And then, all of a sudden training camp comes around, media day, Karl's a last-minute scratch, if you will, and kind of hasn't had the opportunity to play throughout the entire training camp for the most part. And I think that's getting, all the attention. But, Rudy hasn't either. Rudy has been dealing with the knee, body, whatever is going on, just kind of fatigue from Eurobasket. So, yeah, I kind of – it's felt like one of these things where it's been long – haven't learned a lot, and it hasn't really gotten better. So they need to start playing basketball games and winning to, I think, sort of affirm their position that this was a good move for them and that they're, that this is as good as they've said it was going to be.
Now it looked like on the Friday night game. I think I'm getting some feedback here.
You're good there.
Okay, thank you.
You're good.
It appeared on the Friday night game, which is, by the way, a preseason practice game, but that you guys who covered it were like, oh boy, this looks clunky a little bit. It doesn't look. Was that more a concern or just an observation? Because, it's one game preseason, and as you said, it's not like these guys have played together a lot. But I was just curious what your overall takeaway was from that experimental run, which sounds like it definitely had some kinks to iron out.
Yeah, I thought it was terrible. That comes, though, with context, right?
Right.
That day, we talked to Karl at shoot-around practice the morning of the game, and he goes, well, today was only the second day Rudy and I have got to practice together. And he goes, and the first day didn't really count because I didn't get to practice. So I was like, wait a minute. Sounds like what practice to me? So, literally the first time they had full contact practice together on the floor together, not just those two, but that whole starting group was the day of that Friday game. And it looked like it. There was absolutely zero flow in the offense, which was a staple of the Finch offense. That's kind of like his offensive ethos, right? Ball movement, replace, kind of get out of the way and let your players play and let the players on the floor let each other play. And it was so sticky. It looked like a talented group at pickup that had never played pick together before, And I don't mean any of this to be an indictment of what this is going to be during the season, but we have, 25 minutes of tape on this starting group, and it looked like a roster that did not fit well together. Now, I don't believe that, but that is the one thing we have on film to look at with this group, and I think it affirms the people's opinion that this was going to take a little while to, work out, get the clunkiness out. Finch has talked about how he's expected it to be clunky at the beginning of the year, and I think that just kind of proved that point. How long is it going to be clunky? That's my question now.
Dane, what's also the plan for Cat? So he obviously had that hospital stay for whatever illness that was. Is there a type of maybe slow buildup here to once they get rolling on Wednesday? Is it just 42 minutes for Karl? Is there going to be a slow build into getting him up to playing the regular minutes? What do you think the plan is for Karl once the season begins from a minute standpoint?
I mean, there should be no expectation that his minutes shouldn't be anything but normal. And if they aren't going to be, we should learn a little bit more about what this illness is. I mean, the ways I've heard it described to me sounded like a really bad version of strep, So, yeah, you can't like eat and for a while there. And he certainly lost some more weight than he'd already lost. But I don't think this should be an excuse for Karl. Like, I think he has been back practicing for, 2-3 weeks now. If anything, there's some lighter weight that maybe will impact some of his physicality. But in terms of like his wind and being able to play 35 minutes on Wednesday or on Friday, like I don't really foresee that to be any sort of an issue. Sure, nobody has said that exactly. It's just been kind of a bizarre illness that, I think those of us on the beat, out of respect to Karl, he told us not to talk about it. So we haven't talked about it, but I think that comes with the implication that, he's going to be fine, right? And fine to go once the first game happens. So I'm not really sure. I think we just got to see what this looks like on the floor, and hopefully we can just forget all of training camp.
Yeah, exactly right. On Gobert, so let's go to him. I don't know if I have done this diatribe for you, and I won't do the whole thing, but playing for your country in Euro basketball drives me absolutely crazy, especially for veterans, because I want them to be resting because I pay them millions of dollars. So that being said, where are we at with him as well? Because, I mean, he's not a young man. He is a very big man. And I would take it that, stresses on the joints and things like that accumulate for a guy like Gobert. While we're talking about Towns and, the sickness and blah, 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 where do you feel that, are we just going to hit the ground running with Rudy? Or is this also, because he did spend a large portion of the summer playing very competitive basketball, is this also going to be they're going to have to ease him in a bit as well, potentially?
Finch said the first day of training camp, Rudy could play in an NBA game right now.
Okay.
And I mean, Judd, like Finch doesn't really BS with this stuff. Like I think that's real. That said, they took it really easy on his body throughout training camp. I think it's fair to say he played a similarly small amount in training camp and in the preseason games to Karl. So there's whatever's going on, it's kind of equal limitations in that sort of way. The hope, again, is that it's just to kind of have these guys as close to 100% come tomorrow night. I think with Rudy, like, he has been a guy who's been extremely healthy throughout his career. He's also, he just hit 30. He's 7'2". Like, if not this year, probably sometime in the next 4 years that he's under contract here in Minnesota, there are going to be some injury wear and tear that comes from being a product of being in your 30s and 7'2". So I don't know if that's happening right now. There hasn't been any sort of reporting on that, but Finch has just said his body's been sore and they're kind of, just trying to let him get as close to 100% for Wednesday. But again, if 3 weeks ago he was ready to play a game, I believe Finch that, like, I think he's going to be ready to play tomorrow.
Circle back on your point too about the fact, and we've all talked about this, the work in progress fact. Like, I mean, this is just going to be, if they were healthy, it would be to get Cat and Gobert and this entire team now on the same page. It would probably take some games. Dane, I think there's this expectation of, but the Wolves' schedule to start the season is so simple. So, like, how do those two things clash or meet? Because on one hand, if you're going to say, hey, this is going to take some time, I'm not saying that they can't beat bad teams, but I am saying this is not going to be a fine-tuned group, and they're going to come out and play competitive games. How much do those things go head-to-head with, hey, there's a learning curve here, and yes, they're playing bad teams, but to think they're going to win 10 games out of the gate might be a little bit too optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, because they're going to lack chemistry compared to a lot of their other opponents in the beginning of the season, they are going to have to make up for that elsewhere. They are one of the most talented teams in the league. So that in and of itself is, makes up for the lack of chemistry they have compared to the Thunder or to the Jazz or whatever, which wouldn't exactly be two teams I would say have a ton of chemistry with each other.
No.
But really, what they're going to have to do is, until they have that flow we're talking about, till they understand how this defensive scheme is going to work together, like, they're going to have to physically punk some people. And like Rudy and Karl are going to have to, I mean, this Thunder team has no big people on it. So the game plan needs to be bigger than the Thunder and be more physical than them on the interior. Like, that in and of itself, if you can effectively do that, you should be able to knock the Thunder out in the first game and the third game of this season. So yeah, it's like an easy start to the schedule. I think that's probably helpful, given that they kind of still need a preseason. It feels like with this group, that can be a dangerous thing, though, right? Like, yes, the Thunder are going to start tanking at some point in this season. The Jazz are going to start tanking at some point in the season. Game 1 of the season, the Thunder are not going to tank. Game 2 of the season, the Jazz are not going to tank. Game 3 of the season, the Thunder aren't going to tank. So you're going to get a real shot of these teams, but I think they just need to rely on the talent, significantly more talent they have than those teams, and also the fact that they're way bigger than them. Like, you made this trade to be bigger and to punk some people. Like, you got to go out and do that right away.
Dane, what's up with D'Angelo Russell here? So I saw Brian Windhorst was on with our guy Doogie, and he said there's nothing close to an extension. It just kind of seems like, too, in general, that it'll probably play out through the end of the year. Maybe D'Lo hits unrestricted free agency, and maybe the Wolves get a new deal done. Do you kind of feel that it's trending in that same direction, that, hey, they'll just ride this out with D'Lo as they get, maybe inch closer to the midway point of the season, extension talks pick up? What are your kind of thoughts on D'Angelo Russell's future as he enters his last year of his contract?
Well, I think it's good that you brought up the fact that there is a whole year before you need to make a decision on them. I mean, as aggregating goes, particularly with Doogie and Windy, like, it just picks up the top line there. The Wolves aren't interested in extending D'Angelo Russell. Well, that might be true at this moment. Why, if you're the Wolves, would you want to do that right now? When you could wait the whole year to see how this plays out? Like, yeah, maybe if it works out great, you have to pay D'Lo $4 or $5 million extra per year, but I think they'd take that. I think if the Wolves are like win 55 games and it leads you to need to pay D'Lo $5 million more a year, like, okay, at least you've seen it and you know what it is. Like, I think there was a lot of confusion of when that came out, because it's also when all the rookie extensions are going on. Like, the rookie extensions had to happen by yesterday, on Monday. A veteran extension for D'Angelo Russell does not need to happen until June 30th, after the season is over. It's the same situation as Patrick Beverley last year, which, what happened? He got the extension in the middle of the season. So I don't think this is any signal of like smoke around D'Lo right now. I think it's just a logical thing to see how this all, plays out. And by every account, like, D'Lo is really dialed in on this season and, excited to prove himself. It seems like he understands that's what this year is about for him from a professional money standpoint. Like, go play, prove it, get paid by the Wolves or somebody else.
Yeah, and Dane, the one thing that I'm curious about that too is because you're right. There's like this assumption, well, are you going to sign him? One, you don't have to now, but two is, Tim Conley is still new. And so, like, he wants to see this guy play. And by the way, we have all seen guys like this before. D'Lo is,
Wiggins. I mean, this is the exact thing we were so up in arms about with Wig getting the max contract. Yes. It was a year before. Glenn looked him in the eyes, shook his hand, and gave him a max contract a year before he had to. Like, jokes aside, why did you give it to him a year before he had to? You lock in the guys that are no-brainers. Yes. I personally think, like, D'Lo, I would sign D'Lo right now if it was for like 4 years, $90 million, and we could get into why there's this salvage a salary slot, all sorts of things, but you don't have to do it right now. So why would you? I think this is a nothing burger, really.
And he also is a classic, and we have both covered these guys before. He's a classic training camp arrive happy guy. Hey, everything's great, and he's a smart kid. Like, he's a smart guy. But you know what? I sort of like this too. And you're exactly right with Wiggy as well. Perfect comparison here. You know, if you're Tim Conley and Chris Finch, that you are far more likely to get a lot more from D'Angelo Russell playing on the last year of his contract than just saying, "Oh, okay, here's an extension." So I like this, but I mean, I do think that we forget sometimes that Tim Conley and Finch are a new team themselves. Tim Conley is still new, like they have not played a regular season game yet, and to just assume that he's going to retain everybody that's not how this works. So I actually like what he's doing here in giving himself at least a bit of room to work with. So if he says, you know what, I really don't like this guy that much, there's a way to part company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they also need to play some chess here with this game. Like, even if Conley gets the chance to watch this for a year and it's good, but maybe not great, it's worth it to salvage this salary slot. Like, people normally we think about when D'Lo's making $31 million a year this year, or $31 million this season. If he goes into unrestricted free agency and signs somewhere else, the Wolves do not get $31 million in cap space. They're already over the cap. That's what happened when you bring in $40 million of Rudy Gobert. Carl's about to kick up to $50 million. Ant's about to get they will in perpetuity are not going to have cap space. And D'Lo's $30 million coming off the books is not going to do that. So if that happens, let's play this out. Like, if D'Lo walks in the offseason, what's your plan at point guard going forward? Jordan McLaughlin or a player from a mid-level exception point guard, which is like $10 million. Like, Tyus Jones just signed for 15. Like, that is going to be a low-level point guard that they would have to replace D'Angelo Russell with. So for me, that makes it one of two paths. Like, you give this to D'Lo, you hope he's the guy, or you have that contract that you could then, again, trade in the future. That's path one. Mm-hmm. Or path two is Ant becomes Luka, and he becomes your point guard of the future. Your kind of lead ball handler type of guy. I think that is going to be one of the most fascinating sort of strategy things for the next 5 years is how they want to use Anthony Edwards. I think right now Finch is into the idea of Ant kind of being like the activating himself from the corner, slasher type of guy, on ball sometimes. But I think there's a case to be made that the best role for Ant could prove to be the Luka Doncic, the James Harden, the big guard who doesn't look like a point guard but plays point guard for your team. I think that if you move off of D'Lo, that kind of forces your hand to be that what you want to do with Anthony Edwards. And I think right now, I've asked Mitch about this a couple times. I do not think he's anywhere close to wanting to do that with Ant. Certainly not this season, and maybe not for a couple of years till Ant really, grows more and makes that quote unquote leap.
Dane, and even just on the idea of, taking away the traditional point guard and just seeing guys like Luka bring up the ball and having that idea, it seems to me from an outsider perspective here too, by the way, who's someone who doesn't consume a ton of NBA, that just overpaying for the point guard position just seems not illogical, but just you could spend that money elsewhere too, right? Like, is that a position too where unless you have a guy like Steph Curry who's generationally great, or Ja Morant who's obviously budding in front of our eyes, like it just seems like spending a lot of money at the point guard position doesn't seem like the wisest spot to do that in a salary cap kind of league.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the deepest position in the league, like, and it's not even close. It's also like a height thing, right? Like, there's a lot more human beings can play point guard, right? So there's a larger like variety of different things you could do at point guard. Now, maybe in the future, a couple years down the road, it is Ant at as your main lead ball handler, and maybe it is a guy like Jordan McLaughlin next to him. Like we could go back to like some of the famous teams, like Derek Fisher was the point guard with the Lakers, but it was kind of like Kobe's show, right? Like Ron Harper or whatever with the Bulls. Like that is not or again with Luka, like Brunson or with Harden in Houston, Patrick Beverly, right? Like those are kind of like these cheaper point guards. So I think like there is a case to save some money on a position by having it be point guard, though you need to trust that Ant can play that Luka, Harden, D Wade type archetype of lead ball handler in a non-point guard body. I think that's where he's going. I think that's the way, if it were me, I would move with it. But to be fair, we don't know. Like, he hasn't shown enough of that yet to really make a big bet on it.
Last thing, sir. How nice is this to be talking about and covering a team? And now I know the Butler year was certainly intriguing and it was supposed to be fun. So like you've covered a relevant team at least once or twice. But how nice is this to be covering a team now for the first time that I would say is sort of at the top of the league as far as intrigue, as far as expectations. I mean, this is about as un-Wolves like as you could possibly get. It's got to be just seriously a breath of fresh air to be covering a team where people are actually talking about that team as the season gets started.
Yeah, I mean, this is my sixth year on the beat, and only 2 of those teams have had winning records. But this is John Krasinski's 19th year on the beat. Me and him did a show together last night, and he has only covered 2 winning teams in his career on the Timberwolves.
Says a lot about Johnny.
That's what I said.
That's a lot. That's a reflection on Johnny, not Timberwolves.
But in all seriousness, like, I think you guys know how I tried cover this team a lot by talking about the actual basketball and what it looks like on the floor and studying that. And so much of that for me has been like, we're watching these games play and we're talking about what could this player be on, quote unquote, the next good Wolves team, and that was so much of the on-court basketball analysis. Well, this is the next good Wolves team. So what is happening now is real basketball that matters. And we are going to learn about what these players who have, from, Rosas to Gupta to Connolly, have all been kind of put together in this idea of we're developing. So once we're good, a Nasri to Jordan McLaughlin or whatever can come into the mix. That's what we've been talking about forever. And now we can talk about a team, the starting lineup, and how well this is coming together and how well it stacks up against the rest of the league. I think for Wolves fans, it's going to be a completely different experience from the way you watch, the way you learn about this team. And it could go a lot of different directions too. Like, it's going to be fun. This might not work out.
Right.
And it could also work out really, really well. Like the example, the glass very half full example that I've talked about is 2 years ago when Chris Paul went to Phoenix. Boom, 60 wins and in the finals. I think Rudy Gobert and Chris Paul are similar types of players in that they're not this individual, 20, 25 a night, driving individual offense in any sort of way. But I think they are a similar caliber of player, maybe like the 18th and 17th best players in the league or something. They're the type of guy who comes in and all of a sudden every other player on your team is 8% better. That's exactly what happened with Chris Paul in Phoenix. And that you compound that 8% on every single player, you bring a professional mindset every single night, and they elevated really quickly. I think Rudy is that same type of player in his own different way, defensively, screen setting, lob threat, the little things on the margins that over 82 games, 48 minutes a night make a huge difference. Like, this could really work out well, but they're taking a pretty big bet that is the type of player that Rudy is. And that's where we're going to find out this season.
Plug your pod too, Dane, so people can know where to find it.
For sure. Yeah. The Dane Moore NBA podcast, pretty much 5 days a week. I have all the different beat writers from the team joining me. I got Chris Hine from the Star Tribune on Mondays. I had John Krasinski from The Athletic for today's show on Tuesday. Chase Frederick from Pioneer Press Wednesday. Britt Robson from Mim Post on Thursdays. And then Kyle Teige, who works with you guys over here at Score North as well on Fridays. So yeah, I mean, for many years I've been doing post game pods at like 2 a.m. I
know you have. I've seen you do them. I've left while you're doing them.
Oh yeah, man. I'm so grateful to not be doing that anymore. But it won't limit the amount of podcasts and coverage we do. And I mean, Judd, like, we're back in the locker room. This year it's it's a different thing. So I'm really looking forward to the coverage of this team because I think a lot of why this will or will not work will be determined by the personalities and how those personalities connect. And not that we get a full insight into that, but you brought up the Jimmy Butler season. I definitely noticed that in the locker room in 2017. So we'll be tracking those sort of things, and I think this will be a year where those of us in the media and by proxy the fans will learn a ton about this team and who the guys are individually. I think goes a long way.
Great stuff, Dane. Thank you.
Thanks, Dane. Appreciate you, dude.
Dane Moore from the Dane Moore NBA podcast. Great stuff, which we will certainly react to at some point. But you know what we got next, Declan Goff? We've got, that's right, Phil might not be here, but the stud stable is. Randy from Cottage Grove contacted us and said, look, I need to get on because I am not in jail. I am not in a courthouse. I have, at least we think he's not. I want to give you my stud stable from Vikings over the Dolphins, and that is what we will get to next on Mackey and Judd.